The scariest villains aren't the most powerful, but are the ones that scare you with their versions of right and wrong. Antagonists come in all shapes and forms, but I want to discuss the ones that think they're right from these flawed political views. In most of these stories, others suffer too, but only the protagonists are fortunate and clever enough to stand up to the antagonist. These antagonists aren't just products of a broken system, they're the very forces preventing progress. President Snow from the Hunger Games had a rare case of receiving a prequel dedicated to his backstory, which is the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. The book doesn't redeem Snow, but it reminds us of nature versus nurture and how that plays into Snow's psychology. Snow didn't even grow up as privileged as the rest of the capital, but his tipping point to this side of history was betraying Sejanus, who was his best friend, for rebelling. There is a clear contrast from the fact that both Snow and Sejanus came from the academy only to grow into having opposing beliefs on the districts. Even when Snow lived in District 12 and grew up fending for himself, his key influences brought him to his beliefs. Snow believed he was enforcing justice, no matter how cruel. We see how easy it is to accept a bad reality because, according to us, how could we justify annually killing 23 kids? However, to the people in Pan Am, the lies and propaganda were normalized. He ends up dying before watching the whole vicious cycle of rulers end with President Coin's death, choking on his own poison. Another example of an ideological antagonist is Viren from the Dragon Prince, who felt being in power was best for the kingdom. This seems a bit more selfish, but he was taught that authoritarian rule was truly better and justified all the horrible means he used, especially his use of dark magic. On the surface, he looked like a shallow evil villain, but slowly as the story unfolded, we got to see the trauma that built up to it. Once he lost everything, we saw how he had good in him, as he always wanted what's best for his kids and couldn't stand Claudia sacrificing himself for him. His backstory didn't redeem him, but it explained where these ideas stemmed from, which was his wife leaving him after he sacrificed his pure heart to use dark magic to save his son. In the end, actions speak louder than words, and we see his growth as he sacrifices his life for the kingdom as a full circle moment. My favorite example is Belos from the Owl House. His ideas are fundamentally flawed as he was bitter that his brother left him for a romantic pursuit with a witch. This caused him to seek the destruction of the witches' world for decades as he set up a plan to keep them in a system for what he believed to be order. He manipulated and calculated every move to bring in supporters through fear of the unknown and the safety he could bring. This was all leading up to the Day of Unity, which would kill all witches. We see where his pain comes from, as hurt people, as he reincarnates his brother constantly. Hunter was the reincarnation to escape with horrible trauma after blindly believing his family and the privilege he received as the Golden Guard. Even though he believed he was helping humanity, his actions made him evil. The conclusion of him trying to deceive Luz one last time just to be stepped on to become mush tied up his story satisfyingly. A common similarity between these examples that I'd like to highlight is the use of propaganda for systemic deceit. These stories aren't just fiction. They're mimicking reality and how easy it is for us to fall for these lies. We need to question authority. One of the best parts of the Hunger Games is how Suzanne Collins makes the point that once an idea is born, it never truly dies, as others are going to try to replicate Snow, just on the opposing side, which manifested into President Coin, which is why Katniss kills her first. This can also be seen in the Owl House, as the Collector was also a dictator in their own right, but Luz still went for that option as it seemed to be the lesser of two evils, which ended up being true, as the Collector was just a broken kid who needed love. A counterexample to these antagonists is Bill Cipher from Gravity Falls. He is well written and is given a slight explanation for his actions, but they're harder to resonate with him, which makes him more of a shallow villain. This doesn't matter as Gravity Falls centers on the kids and growing up more than systemic issues like other media. However, Bill's selfish reasons for his actions differ from an ideological antagonist. His chaotic energy brings in humor and the lighthearted aspect to the ending, as he was merely just a target for the twins. I believe that these stories don't work without world building. The Hunger Games is so captivating as it draws you into this depressing world of kids having to fend for themselves in an unfair world. The Owl House shows us the coven system that witches are forced to accept even from school. The Dragon Prince shows us the current world that doesn't appear wrong until we see the lack of magic through separation from the elves. The loss of diversity and individuality leaves the kingdom dull and empty. This can be seen to intentionally remind us of our world and how divided we are. To conclude, when it comes to creating a compelling antagonist, they don't need to be redeemed, especially with unforgivable actions. They always need to have a story that gets explained to show their character arc and their origins. The audience is searching for what led them on this path of villainy. My favorite antagonists have false ideologies justifying their means. The combination of their manipulation and power create high stakes and difficulty for the protagonist to escape the system. Tragic stories may keep the protagonist losing, but that doesn't supply a proper conclusion. Even the bittersweet ending of the Hunger Games is controversial as audiences often want good characters to end happily. Although, in my opinion, the Hunger Games had a perfect ending where it's realistic that the main characters would still face heavy impacts after all they've been through, but their determination helped them succeed. In the end, the best antagonists don't just fight our beloved heroes, but they challenge their entire world.